My name's Adam Oyebanji. I live in Edinburgh, Scotland, and I'm the author of the adventure novel Esperance. And the way I think of Esperance really is as a crime novel that gets a little bit weird because in a clash of histories and cultures and different ideas about justice, the consequences will be deadly. And that is Esperance in a nutshell. How would I describe my book in three words? Science fiction noir. What is the most essential component of a great science fiction adventure? You've got to have good characters. You've got to have characters that people care about. And then you have to put those characters through the ringer. And I think that's true of nearly all books, and it's absolutely true of science fiction. The science stuff is just a background for people to be people and for people to deal with stuff. What is harder to write? The twists and turns of a crime or the boundless possibilities of sci-fi? They are difficult in different ways, I think. With the twists and turns of crime, you have to make sure that all the pieces fit, that the clues make sense, that the characters' reactions to the clues make sense, that the ending is tied closely to what the reader has read before. So that, at least for me, that requires quite a lot of planning. For science fiction more broadly, I think the issue is to keep it real, right? I mean, that sounds bizarre, but the difficulty with science fiction is you're depending on where it's set, but you're essentially making up an entire world. And that world has to be real to the reader who's never seen it before. And that too has its difficulties, but it's apples and oranges. I'm not sure I could tell you which is harder. They're just different challenges. If I had access to Abby's futuristic tech for one day, the first thing I would do is, I think, because Abby is effectively able to access all sorts of secured systems, it would be very difficult for me not to reach in through various firewalls and make a billionaire's day very, very unpleasant. Which character in Esperance was the most difficult to write and why? Ethan is the most difficult character because he's the least like me. He is frankly a wee bit racist. He's sort of conservative and grumpy, and he's all about throwing people in jail. And I'm none of those things. So I had to make sure that I did right by him, and that Ethan is a real person. So that required effort on my part. Abby, on the other hand, is just what I would do if I had no inhibitions and there were no consequences. The best or worst piece of writing advice I've ever received is, I think the best piece, and I think it's important, and I repeat it myself, is, you only have control over the writing. You don't have control over whether anyone else likes it or anyone else picks it up or anyone else publishes it. You only have control over the writing. So you have to find either joy in writing or meaning in writing, because that's all you can concentrate on. The rest is largely out of your control. And I find that when I sit down in front of the computer, I find that very comforting. If Esperance had a soundtrack, what would it sound like? I think it would probably have two soundtracks, because the main characters are so very, very different. I think I think a soundtrack for Ethan would be sort of 80s rock, like Dire Straits, Telegraph Road, that kind of thing, quite dour, but but beautiful music. And I think Abby would be much more joyful, much more high energy. Um, you know, I think more dance music. I could see her, I could see her beating people up in rhythm. The most surprising thing I discovered while researching for Esperance was that there is a triggering moment in Esperance that comes really towards the end of the climax that I stumbled across, or I stumbled across a version of it when I was at law school, and that was shocking to me. I can't say any more than that. Because it would spoil the book. But if you read it and you get there, you'll know what I'm talking about. If I found myself stranded on an isolated space station, the one book I want to have with me is, I think it has to be something epic, which means it probably has to be a grand fantasy. So I would probably settle for Lord of the Rings because it's it's extremely long, and even though it's a wee bit dated in places, I think it would be a great comfort on a space station. What one thing would I like readers to take away from Esperance? I would like them to feel that they hadn't wasted their time and that they'd been on an adventure. I think that's what I'd like them to take away. There's quite a lot in the book to think about, but at the end of the day, I hope they had a fun time reading it, that they had a fun adventure.